podcast. It is the 2nd of May, and Brent crude oil is up about 0.5% this morning in Asian trade. Brent crude trading at 62.50, while WTI is still below $60, but looking like it could move up. The news overnight that would appear that the Chinese and the US have found a window that they can both fit through to save face and get to the start of trade talks. Let's kick off this morning with Matthew Wright, senior freight analyst at Kepler, based in the UK. Matt, your thoughts on this news of China, US? Of course, it is the biggest issue in the world right now, the trade war between the world's two biggest economies. With the mood music we're seeing, do you think this is kind of the beginning of the end of this face-off between China and the US? Or is it just the end of the beginning? One of those little play with words, but ultimately a sense of where we are in this face-off.
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head. I mean, I'd almost say it's the beginning of the beginning. I think the animosity between the two sides, there's a lot of way that needs to go before we start to see a brokered deal. I think both countries realize it's in their incentive. I think that we just need to get people, see people in the room having those conversations. I think from a commodities markets point of view, we're not, there hasn't been as big an impact as, say, OPEC announcements recently. But the shockwaves of if these tariffs, if these trade implications do go ahead, that will have such a significant impact on the global economy. And as a result, commodity demand, oil demand over the next 6 to 12 months, that's when we're going to start to sort of see the pain in the market, so to speak, for the commodity side. But yeah, it's an encouraging first step. But I think with, the uncertainty we've seen coming out of the Trump administration, it's really too soon to say whether this is meaningful or not.
Let's go to Estonia and welcome back to the table Andrei Belyi, the professor and founder and CEO of Baltsen. Andrei, your thoughts on the same theme? And I'm looking at this, obviously sitting in Estonia, sitting on the doorstep of Russia, and the difficulty we've had, seeing the momentum of a deal to find a sort of peace, quote unquote, between Russia and Ukraine, and also facilitated by the US. I'm wondering where you see that, what seemed like a bit like this morning with China and the US, it seems like, oh, this could be close, as it did between Russia and the US about a month or so ago, and it's proven being very difficult to land that fish. Your thoughts on where the US, Ukraine, Russia negotiation is at the moment? Are we still at the beginning, or are we getting near the end? Your thoughts?
I think it's neither beginning or end. Is just a situation as it is. Remember that every single US administration, probably with a minor exception of Biden, after the Cold War, tried to normalize the relations with Russia, and each time it collapsed either due to one or another behavior. And the expectation is that Trump administration followed instead of breaking this pattern, and also over-relied, like Obama, Bush, and Clinton did it in the past, on a sort of assertiveness that they will find a dialogue with Moscow, and they didn't already, and very likely they won't. And having said that, Moscow is also, we see that there are some political games inside Russia, but not as clear as we can follow the US or Europe. So we understand that there are some political games there, but we don't exactly know which ones. And having said that, there are a number of unpredictabilities. I would say that Moscow is not ready to take Trump's proposals, and Trump might not be ready to understand motivations of Kremlin, and very likely there's gonna be a spiral of tensions between the two countries, similarly to what we have seen with other administrations. For example, you remember Obama started with a reset with Russia, and then it ended up anyway in tensions. Similar things with Bush and Clinton. I would assume that the pattern is the same in this case.
Andrea,
And this-
I want to just also now sort of take a leap and connect these two, the issue of China, the US, and Russia, the US, Ukraine, and put forward the thesis that Russia will not be permitted by Beijing to do a deal with the US until China and the US come to a deal on the big trade issues that divide those two countries, that China needs to can't give Trump a win right now while it's still facing this face-off with the US, that the influence now of China on Russia will limit the ability of Russia to negotiate a deal with Washington. Your thoughts on connecting those two things?
Well, I definitely cannot comment on what people in Beijing and China would think, but the fact that Trump overestimates the idea that Russia will ally with the United States against China is certainly a delusion. It will not happen. And from there to say whether the initiatives come first from Moscow or first from Beijing is very difficult to estimate from our side. But certainly the whole idea that Trump and his administration are about to kind of like shape and to say that we will break the alliance between Russia and China, that seems to be very idealistic.
It does indeed. Let's go to Tehran, where we have another center of this sort of global matrix at the moment. Daniel Rahmat, Senior Energy Security Consultant based in Tehran. Of course, in another third corridor, we've got the I don't know how many people there's in the US government negotiating all this stuff, but it doesn't seem too many of them. But in another corridor, the US is trying to negotiate a new agreement with Iran. I'm trying to also understand, Daniel, a month later, whether we're still at the beginning of those talks. It seemed they have some momentum, but the sanctions and the full pressure of the US government coming down very heavy on Iranian oil exports. How do you assess the Iranian-US talks on the nuclear program there a month into what seems to be a stuttering discussion?
Hello, Sean, and hello, everybody. Yes, Sean, it's a very complex situation. You know, there are several talks going on parallelly, one with the US, another talks are ongoing with the three European countries, Germany, France, and the UK. At the same time, Iran is still keeping its talks with Russians and with Chinese to ensure them that this is not going to be a dramatic strategy shift towards West. So, you know, all these parties have somehow contrast in their interests. So Iran should manage this. At the same time, there are two scenarios going on from the American side. One of them is a deal or a war, and at the same time reviving or reestablishment of the maximum pressure of the Trump administration, which is now working. We can see its impacts on Iranian crude exports. Recently, I just checked the Vortexa data regarding Iranian crude deliveries to China, and that has very significantly declined. So please consider that Iranian foreign ministry and Iranian diplomats are now assessing whether Americans really want a sort of deal. Is it a good cop and bad cop game inside the American administration? the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mark Rubio, says, okay, go and start a war with them. The Ministry of Defense in America is emphasizing on retaliation and Iran support to Houthis. At the same time, Iran is talking with Witkoff, a person who is a very close friend to Donald Trump, and he is trying to make peace. Times and again, we are hearing that people are criticizing Witkoff for being naive or somehow not professional in dealing with Iran in talks. So it's a little bit confusing scene. But what
where do you think the Iranians are? I mean, putting aside, we know what the Americans want, more or less everything, and they want it today. But where is Iran's ability and its cultural and its previous sort of evidence would show that Iran likes to move very, very slowly in these kinds of discussions? Is there an occasion here where Iran might move quicker than its normal posture, or how do you assess the Iranian side to this?
You know, what is almost clear is there is an already prepared package of deal with Biden administration, which for any reason was not signed during Rouhani administration, the one before President Raisi. So we know that there is a deal ready to be signed, and Iran has already agreed with that. The leader of Iran has already agreed with that. But the American side has some points that they want to make changes in that deal. Those points, as far as I know, are Americans want a sort of unlimited barriers. I mean, lifelong barriers for Iran to reach a sort of military atomic program. And Iran, yesterday, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has agreed with that in his statement that what we want is clear, and what Americans is a lifelong barrier on a military, a lifelong guarantee for non-military atomic program in Iran. You have already agreed with that. So the principles of this deal, I think the two sides have agreed. What may prolong the process is the legal manner of writing that, which could guarantee Iran's concerns. Actually, Iran does not want the American sanctions to come back in a blink of an eye. Iran wants a kind of procedure, wants a kind of guarantee for this. And at the same time, Americans want technical assurance that Iran will not rebuild its program again by any means, under any title. So I think that what may prolong these talks is the technical issues and the legal discussions. At the same time, Iran wants significant reduction in American pressure while the talks are ongoing and while the deal is made. And there are other things which we need to know. That
sounds to me like there's a lot of hurdles there. It's more the beginning of the beginning rather than any sort of end line in sight. Matt, let's look at where all of this is playing out in the freight rates, in the shipping lanes. Inevitably, we're now sort of 100 days into Trump. We started Trump with a lot of Biden sanctions coming in on certain vessels. We've got this trade war now, and reports indicate that significant reduction in the volume of exports between China and the west coast of America. What are the freight rates telling us about what's happening next? Where is this going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit it on the head. It has been an incredibly volatile start to the year. And I think if you look back over the last couple of years where we've had huge geopolitical events, 2025 was almost shaping up to be a quieter year. And yet that's, been turned on its head. But in terms of the impact on freight rates, where we are now, I think there's a lot of uncertainty around what the US is going to do. And I think we've got these port fees on Chinese built and Chinese owned ships. We've got a bit more clarity on that now. And that will start to have an impact on the market come October, but maybe not as big as we thought it was going to be previously. The main thing happening in the market is, the outlook regarding OPEC production. How much crude are we really going to see hit the market this month and next month? We have these rumors about further supply coming online in June. from a tanker market point of view, this is all great news from an owner's from a higher freight rates point of view. It does to an extent limit the attractiveness of Atlantic basin grades going into Asia. So there's a bit of a mixed picture from a VLCC point of view. And furthermore, if we do see all this additional supply come online, we're at $62 a barrel now. Are we seeing this going to be putting more pressure on the flat price, which would, from a tanker point of view, be great again from an owner's point of view, because what we'd do is see more bargain hunting. You see, India, China, those huge net importers who are very heavily exposed to crude price, really, really filling their storage capacity, which China has space to do because onshore inventories got drawn down quite heavily over the first 3 months of the year. And then there's a huge number of things happening across the west of Suez as well. We've got Suezmax, Aframax rates at year-to-date highs, completely unrelated to the OPEC situation. We've got Kazakh barrels from the Black Sea taking a 2-month voyage around the Cape of Good Hope, obviously having to avoid the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, going into Asia. That's distributing the fleet quite widely. And then on the Aframax side, as you mentioned at the top of this segment here, that the US sanctioned all those Russian ships, all those ships that were dealing with Russian cargoes at the start of the year. That's created a supply crisis in the Aframax sector, particularly for ESPO barrels. So we saw a lot of vessels.
But now that those prices are below the price cap of $60, should it not be safe for them to move those Russian barrels?
Well, that's it, increasingly so. So this has been another dynamic that's entered the market compared with where we were in January. So previously there was the shadow fleet and the Russian fleet, the vessels that were willing to just continue to engage with Russia, regardless of where the price was. They were just willing to take that risk. And now a lot of that was to do with the fact that their ownership was a little bit more opaque. And so but then after the sanctions and a huge number got removed, there was a much greater emphasis on the rest of those vessels that weren't sanctioned to sort of pick up the slack. At the moment, that's who have been continuing to shift ESPO and those other cargoes that were affected by that supply crisis. But you're absolutely right. We now have a lower price. It's bringing in all vessels that are now eligible to sort of move into this market if they wish to. If they want to.
And that's certainly a big factor in this area of the world. Dr. Andre, I wanted to get your thoughts on the agreement that U.S. and Ukraine signed, the infamous minerals agreement that has been in the oven now for a number of months, and it seems they finally put pen to paper on it. Sitting in Estonia, a border country with Russia, what does this deal look like? How is it being digested? Of course, there's a lot of reporting that the Baltic states are in an extra level of sensitivity now, given the uncertainty with the NATO commitment from Washington. What does all of this look like with the deal between Kiev and Washington? Does that make the Baltic states feel more relaxed, there more certainty that America is betting in on Kiev's side, or does it make it feel the opposite? How does that sit in the context of everything else?
It's difficult to say because I think overall the sentiment is ambivalent. And on one hand, true that economic interests of the United States present in Ukraine would ensure certain level of leverage. On another hand, we have to understand that partly discussing the value of the mineral deal is a little bit like claiming a value of fish which is in the water in the lake before it actually out on a plate or in a shop. And that also adds another layer of difficulty. In addition to that, Trump does not seem to be willing to support Ukraine, and that definitely creates certain reticence across the European Union in general. And whether the European Union will increase the spending on defense, whether the European Union will for example, increase purchases of military equipment from Ukraine or try to do it on their own. So there are a lot of controversies and discussions around. We've seen, for example, that Macron takes rather tough line saying that, okay, now is the moment, the de Gaulle moment, right, when European Union can create its own army. Some Baltic, Estonian and Lithuanian think tankers were perplexed about it for ages, because the reliance on the US would be the priority over reliance on France or even the United Kingdom. And now this seems to change, and the mood seemed to change. From there to say what are the outcome, of course, we cannot predict anything.
Daniel, I wanted us to come back to this idea of time frame, deadline around the US-Iran talks, to the need to get to an agreement quickly. As seems to be not just a Washington desire, but it does seem to be also something that the IAEA is calling out. The Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi was saying earlier this week that he has serious concerns about the Iranian ability to move forward from a civil nuclear program to a weaponized program, and that there is a issue of urgency of time here in the next weeks, months. Is there any recognition within Tehran, from the Iranian side, that there is a time constraint here, that there is an urgency? That is there any recognition of a deadline time frame from the Iranian side?
Sean, I think as an independent analyst,
yes,
I think that the time constraint and the time frame and the Iran's time to reach an atomic bomb, all this kind of material are just leverages to put more pressure on Iran. Because as I said, the deal on the Iranian side is ready. And Iran once joined a deal which the world powers signed, and the US withdrew that. And since the time of Trump's withdrawal from the deal, the character of Iranian nuclear program has very significantly changed. And Iran and other nations in the Middle East have witnessed the genocide in the region. So Iran is very hesitant, and Iran is very suspicious about the wills behind the Trump administration's pressure for making a deal as soon as possible to remove its nuclear program. Iran has the knowledge, and Iran can make an atomic nuclear program anytime it wants. But you know better than me that making a bomb is a very different technical thing compared with putting a bomb on the warhead of a missile.
Exactly, and not to get too caught up in the technicalities of that, but just the sense of timing and the ability to move forward. And just wanted to take the opportunity, Daniel, to also kind of look at the same question I was asking earlier with Andre in the issue in Russia, Ukraine, and China's involvement and willingness and influence there. Where does it feel like China's involvement and influence is within the Iranian-US talks? Inevitably, China is the main economic outlet for Iran to sell its oil. Is there signs there that they are backing away from this American pressure to take Iranian oil?
The thing with Iranian exports to China is a sort of complex and simple thing. China does not recognize American sanctions on Iranian oil, neither on the Russian oil. But they do not have, or they do not want to, create a sort of umbrella to support this oil trades with Shandong especially. They're just telling the Shandong refiners that we don't recognize the oil, so you're free to buy that. But there is no tool to protect them against American sanctions, if there is any, which we have seen that there were at least two Chinese oil infrastructure in Shandong. And in practice, since the ties with China and the States is not in the best possible mood, we understand that China does not have any significant soft leverage on Americans to push them, reducing the pressure on Chinese small refineries. So either China wants to support Iran or not in this case. The thing could be getting more complicated if Iran-American talks does not increase a sort of satisfactory level. Because if Americans want to implement their military power to stop Iranian tankers going towards China, Iran will not be able to retaliate if, because Iran will be pushed to use force against American forces there or against the flow of oil from
it's
Gulf
certainly
nations.
It feels like it's not the confidence a woman have, and I think the market's trying to figure out that question: how long will China keep taking Iranian oil? Matt, let's just get the survey question in first here, which is a little bit late getting to, but how soon will China-US reach a trade agreement? Sort of the bookend of the first question to Matt. There's the end of the beginning, or the beginning of the end, but ultimately time is different for everybody. And that, like the Iranians, the Chinese do not move quickly on matters like this, and they certainly won't be moving to an American time frame. How soon will China-US reach a trade agreement? By the end of Q2, i.e. the end of June, which is next month, by the end of Q3, which is the end of September, the end of Q4, obviously the end of the year, or sometime next year? How imminent do you think, how quickly will this find some kind of resolution, given that on both sides you would think the impact on both economies, and so the whole world, is quite significant? Matt, I don't think the OPEC Plus are going to have an answer to that question by the time they meet on Monday. Your thoughts on their decision and the outlook for the continuation of this sort of accelerated supply increases that OPEC Plus are considering?
So, I think we've all second-guessed OPEC before. I think nothing's going to be confirmed until probably just the night before. So, it would be naive to think I have any insight here, even with Amina on the Kepler team now. But I would say, that we're going to see some agreement. I think there is broad consensus about probably about where the production hike is going to be. Precisely where it's going to be is yet to be determined. But I think we can be confident that we're going to see some, more substantial numbers for May and June.
The increases will continue. Dr. Andre, looking at the European situation at the moment, and the slow or the not so slow progress in Russian, Ukraine, US peace talks there, where does that intersect, do you think? We're seeing reports, the FT and other places, that companies are starting to look at what they need to do legally to get cover for returning to Russia and returning to engage with Russian energy, perhaps. What's your own outlook for how quick Russia will be supplying Europe again with pipeline gas? Because, of course, it continues to supply with LNG.
Well, it's again a question that doesn't have, or that we don't have an answer, because it's basically... Yeah.
I mean, we still have the infrastructure, right? We still have a pipeline through Ukraine. We still have Nord Stream 2 is still there.
No, there are many things which are there, but the question is, first, whether Russia will continue playing hardball or willing to start gaining back or getting back to certain level of cooperation with the West. Note that the very initial supply disruptions didn't come from Europe, they came from Russia. Second, of course, is a question for the European business, whether they will regain confidence in Russian supplies after having actually revised the number of contracts and have concluded new ones, whether it's going to be rollback. It's also a question of the European political class, whether they will recognize any deal in case if there is a deal. And I'm frankly not so optimistic about the so-called deal. So that's another unknown that you add to the
Right.
question. So the existence of infrastructure does not guarantee at all the resumption of the supply relations.
Daniel, just last word with you. I wanted to get your thoughts. We saw a fairly significant regional development recently with the Saudi defense minister visiting Tehran. I just wanted to get your insights on where the regional dynamic is vis-a-vis this US-Iran nuclear talks. The last time this sort of big talks happened 10 years ago with the Obama regime, the Gulf states weren't so happy about. On this occasion, where do you think the regional relations? It looks fairly positive from a distance. The mood music between Riyadh and Tehran has been pretty positive in recent year or two.
Yes, it's been very positive since the Iran-Saudi rapprochement. The two countries have at least stopped actually hostile movements against each other. The media campaign against Tehran and against Riyadh has very significantly declined, or if I cannot say closed. But there should be something we need to consider. Saudi Arabia, together with other GCC nations, consider a sort of 20-25 years window for development, which if they cannot catch up every chance for actually converting their oil-based economy into high-tech or other kind of products economies, they would be facing very critical problems. They are not all in the same side of the table. For example, Kuwait has preferred to invest a lot in other countries, but Saudi Arabia is preparing to take high-tech technologies into their country. And Saudi Arabia is very well aware that they cannot do this without a sort of long-term stability in the region, especially with Iran and Israel at the same time. You know, they rebuilt their relations with Turkey, and it's going very well. With Iran, the problem is if Iran, they think so that if Iran is in a serious trouble, they would not hesitate bombarding Saudi oil infrastructure or disrupting Saudi economy. So Saudis consider the current crisis between Iran and the US a threat for their long-term economic growth. And also they want to make a peace with Israel, but a sort of a strong peace with Israel, something much stronger than what the UAE has made with Israel. So they do not want a problem next door before making a deal with Israelis. So they first should make a sort of balance in Iranian-American actually ongoing issues. At the same time, they're increasing the level of their strategic partnership with Russia and China. So Saudi, I think, is doing very well in this regard.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there. And it certainly feels like some of these big issues, there's the answer on the survey polling. There's optimism in the room that Q3 could deliver a China-US trade agreement. Let's see and hope they find their way. A lot of these big challenges, these big negotiations seem to be, that will be up against some very difficult challenges. And at the same token, different characters, the nature of the Trump administration in its somewhat fickle and demanding posture, and the nations of Russia and China and Iran, old countries with very different sense of timeframes and different sense of urgency or lack of urgency. So it'll be interesting to see how they bridge some of those gaps. Can economics trump, not to use an overused word, but trump some of the these big intractable differences. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much, as always, Matt Wright, Kepler in the UK, Andrei Belli, of course, in Estonia, and Daniel Rahmat in Tehran. Great to be all around the world in 30 minutes. Have a great weekend, everybody, and catch up with you all again next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, everybody.